I was up before the coffee because in June the wheat wakes you whether you're ready or not. The air had that sweet wet smell Kansas gets when the dew wins the argument with the wind. And the house was still in its soft morning truce. Dogs sighing, fridge clicking, my wife making lunches in the slow choreography we've been doing since the kids learned math. Then the back screen door banged and 2 pairs of boots. One pink, one scuffed hand-me-down, pounded through the mudroom like an alarm with legs. Dad, you have to see this. We live on a section line and the fields are what my eyes think about when I'm not steering. Them, pivots like long clocks, terraces like ribs. I grabbed a hat, the moisture meter out of habit, and the little compass app on the phone because it's faster than finding the old brass one in the junk drawer. The kids were already jogging into the breath of the morning, steam coming off their boots where the dew kissed. We crested the little rise where you can see the pivot and the north half of the wheat like a sheet pulled tight on a big bed, and the field had 3 circles in it like someone had printed them with a stamp. Perfect. Not tractor arcs, not pivot tracks. Concentric rings, one small, one twice that, one twice again, 30 feet, 60 feet, 120 feet by my later measure, so precise it made my mouth go dry. And the part that made my daughter point and stop talking, no footprints. No approach, no exit, not even along the service track where we walked to check the pivot towers. The dew should have tattled on anything that pressed weight into the world. It kept a secret instead. There are 2 things you do when your life hands you something you don't have a drawer for. You look for what you know, and you talk to yourself like you're supervising your own hands. My line for mornings that slide sideways is, check what's fixed. I said it under my breath and started running through anchors, pivot tower, corner arm, wheel tracks, wind out of the south, the shallow dip where water likes to sulk. None of those could make circles this clean. The kids were already in the edge row, eyes wide, sending their breath up like they were at recess in winter. Stop, I said too loud and softened it. We go slow. Somebody's art is not our enemy. We stepped to the margin where an unbroken sea of heads met the first circle's edge. My son put his fingers to his lips like he'd remembered something out of a movie. The world didn't need shushing. It had shushed itself. The morning chorus, sparrows, meadowlarks, the creek midge that always sounds like a dial tone, was thinner than it had any right to be. The dog, who loves rule-breaking, stopped at the boundary like I'd drawn a fence with my eyes. Check what's fixed, I said again, because when your brain starts climbing trees, you hand it a rope. The pivot stood in its usual patience, 50 yards away, not a footprint near its base. My phone compass needle did its little dance, then pulled upward as I tilted the phone toward the sky and refused to settle. The dew on my boots went from wet to not without the benefit of a towel as I leaned in. And somewhere in my mouth, the metal of ozone made a cameo, faint as a coin under your tongue. I'm 46 in 2018, which means the back knows about ladders and the brain worries about college. I buy inputs, sell grain, count pennies in diesel, and make a living that looks boring to people who don't know what it costs to be bored for a county. My wife runs a tighter ship than any co-op manager alive and can spot a hail line coming like she's got a personal agreement with the radar. Our kids were at the age where they'll still get out of bed for something you call an adventure if you promise pancakes later and don't ruin it with a lecture. The night before had been ordinary, which is how the morning sells itself when it wants to be anything but. The pivot log, blessed machine that tattles in numbers, showed a 7-second blip in flow on the northeast sector around 3 in the morning, like the pipe breathed once and thought better. I thought about that as I scanned the field for tracks. A raccoon leaves narrative. A teenager leaves confidence. A neighbor leaves kindness and a phone call. We had none. The wheat was near ready. Heads heavy, stems erect, moisture right where a man starts calculating the weather and lying to himself about luck. Out beyond the road, the elevators were already humming, early trucks throwing dust up in curtains that said somebody's field got brave. Ours had patterns instead. My wife and I have a rule about the kids and mysteries. We do the first 10 minutes together, and we don't give the kids words for fear they didn't bring on their own. We look, I said, quieter, and the kids nodded like I'd lent them hats. We made the edge. The first ring, 30 feet across, did a thing I want you to picture carefully because it's where my skepticism had to sit down. The stalks were not crushed. They were laid. Braided almost in a clockwise orientation so clean I wanted to scold someone for taking the time I didn't authorize. The nodes, the little knuckles on the stems, weren't snapped the way deer do, or kids with boards do when mischief is a curriculum. They were bent, polite, as if heat had persuaded them to change their minds instead of force. We stepped inside. The temperature fell a degree or two like a basement does, and the smell went from green bread to that ozone after-storm hint that makes your tongue remember shapes. The sound was wrong in that soft way that makes you write about it badly later, my son whispered, and the word didn't carry. The dog decided to be a different species for a minute and stayed put. The second ring, 60 feet, spun the other way, counterclockwise, same lay. Same respect for the plant's vanity, the aristae pointing like they'd been combed. The dew on the laid stems gathered into perfect beads that looked still. And here's the part my memory replays when it wants to argue with my pride. When I put a finger to the stem, the droplet held together a breath too long before it let go. Like surface tension was a rumor the field was considering. Outside the ring, dew soaked my cuffs like it had a schedule. At the big ring, 120 feet, we stood on the threshold because sometimes you teach kids about boundaries by obeying one you didn't make. My phone compass, that cheap pretend navigator, spun, and when I tilted the phone up, the needle pulled toward the sky again like a fish that won't quit the fight. I held the phone level and it settled with a sulk. My daughter said the whole place felt like a library in my ears, which is a 6-word poem she didn't know she wrote and I won't edit. Drone, my son said, practical as a socket set. The neighbor's kid has a recreational quad we borrow when calving and when curiosity wins. We called. 10 minutes later, the air had a mosquito with opinions above our heads. On the screen, the circles held like drafted lines. No approach marks. No exit strings. The edges. This is going to sound like I'm trying out for television. Were cleaner than geometry deserves in dirt. When the drone crossed the ring's center, the altitude telemetry oscillated, little +2, 3 feet waves, without the machine actually rising or falling. The kid piloting said, "Huh," in the tone adults use when a spreadsheet misaligns. "Check what's fixed," I whispered again, because I needed to prove I still worked. The pivot hadn't moved. The service lane was undisturbed. The ditch ran like it should. The wind came from the south-southeast according to the station out by the highway, which I checked because the day you stop checking the wind is the day you admit defeat. My list of fixed things did not include circles in multiples of 30 feet floating in my math. We measured, because measuring is how you keep your hands calm. I keep a 100-foot tape rolled in the truck for days the world wants to charge me. The kids held ends like flagmen. The small ring met a 30-foot diameter like it had read my ruler before bed. The second read 60, the large 120. I drew a center by happiness and checked it with lines and found that the 60-foot ring had a 4-inch eastward offset from the center the other two agreed on. The ASOS report for dawn told me the wind at that minute was a whisper to the east. I am not saying the ring listened to the wind. I am saying measurements are a religion and I won't blaspheme. We put our boots down inside the big ring. The dew should have told on us. It did for 2 steps. Then, behind us, on the stems we had just touched, the beads formed again. Microscopic first, then visible, like sweat on somebody who's decided to sprint after they said they wouldn't. The trail repaired itself in drops, not magic. That distinction matters to me in the way it will annoy you. I picked a stem and looked for breakage. None. I looked for wood board signatures, the kind of crush you learn to spot if you've spent too many winter evenings on the internet humoring people who want attention. None. The nodes had a kink that didn't feel like violence. The internodes were intact. The lay was so consistent I wanted to hire whoever did it to paint a barn. Pictures, my wife said, arriving in the way she always does. Hair up, judgment in her pocket, love visible as clean shoes. We took photos from ground and air. We marked GPS coordinates for ourselves only. The GPS, tractor-grade RTK when we went back with the big unit, threw a baseline error for a couple of seconds when we drove the tractor across the large ring 2 days later. That's not an omen. That's a log entry. We saved it. At the edge of the big ring, my daughter knelt and said the wheat looked combed like a pony if ponies were made of bread. She is not wrong. Inside the 60, the lay spun the other way and met the first with a seam that looked designed by a seamstress we didn't hire. The 30 was the stillest of the three, a bullseye that didn't bother with elaboration. The dog did not enter the big ring. He is a brave coward. Bees came later, and I will tell you now that over the next week they worked the field like clockmen, except for the ring where they hesitated, looped, chose other work, and came back by the time I wasn't watching. Birds cut the air lanes above and around. The circle had manners even they recognized. People will be practical and ask about kids with planks. I know my kids. I know my neighbor's kids. I know what a human prank looks like and do. I also know stunts get sloppy at scale. This was not sloppy. This was tidy in a way the world rarely is. People will ask about vortices and dust devils. I have watched Kansas make mischief with air since the day I learned to blame weather for my mistakes. A devil writes messy. This was calligraphy. People will ask about the pivot dragging a hose or a tower making a drag arc. The tracks were asleep. The change in flow my pivot logger showed, 7 seconds worth, doesn't draw ring art. It calls a breath and stops. There's a twist of the sort my life likes to hand me. The centers of these circles don't ride a tractor line or a pivot pin or the section's title the way you expect circles to behave in Kansas. The center is loose, like someone dropped a compass point on the first try and then decided not to apologize. I will give you a small engineer's joy we found that morning. The big ring overlaps the task map in my head the way multiples of 30 feet do. You can call that coincidence if you like. The world keeps coincidence in the same drawer as meaning and sometimes uses the wrong label. We harvested. Of course we did. People romanticize wheat until they look at the note on the fridge with what college costs. The yield monitor told me the rings were down a hair, 1 to 2%, compared to their neighbors. The gluten test. At the elevator, turn the needle a shade higher inside the rings than outside. That's not a theory. That's two numbers arguing politely in front of me while I pretend to be a judge. A week out, the kids told me the field goes quiet at a minute after 6. They said, 6:11. For a little minute, I said, we don't invent patterns because it's expensive to believe in them. The dog slept in the shade of the truck like math was beneath him. Check what's fixed, I kept telling myself as the world tried to move. Fence, road, tower, sun, calendar, debt, lunch, marriage, kids, and one morning with 3 rings where Dew forgot how to keep score and my compass thought the sky was something to obey. This is not a crusade. I am not recruiting you to a camp. I am telling you what my field did on a June morning in 2018 and what my notes say. If you came for coordinates, I won't give them. We have neighbors who don't deserve strangers. If you came for an instruction manual to print circles in your own field, you won't get it. If you came for a story that knows how to behave, I can offer you the part where I stood with my kids and felt like someone had combed wheat with a rule I don't own. I will give you what you can take home and test without being a jerk in somebody else's life. If you work land or love someone who does, and you've ever taken a long exposure photo of a field at night or a drone pass in the morning and saw edges where edges have no right to be, or if you have pictures where the lay looks braided without breakage, or you've walked out and found dew that remade itself behind your steps, leave me one word in the comments: rings. Don't send me maps. Don't post pictures that show lat long. Don't make your neighbor famous by accident. Just rings. I'll know you saw a cousin of my morning. If you are the measuring kind, you might go back through your own pivot logs. For breath marks, 6-7 seconds of nothing that don't belong to electricity or wind. You might check the ASOS stations for dawns where wind took a polite east and a circle promised coffee anyway. If you do and you find patterns in places you didn't put them, don't interpret until your baseline is bored. I keep a strip of tape from the small ring in a brown envelope because the world sometimes asks for tokens. It smells like straw and maybe. It is not evidence of anything but weather that doesn't know its job description. I keep also a note on my dash. Check what's fixed. It is there to remind me that most days are wires and bolts and grain checks and kids in boots. The other days are why we write. If you're a skeptic, I want to hire you to do my taxes. If you're a believer, I want you to bring pancakes to my kids and make them laugh. If you are both human things at once, welcome to my backstep. We can talk about multiples of 30 feet and what dew owes us. Here is my last unhelpful line, delivered with all the humility Kansas teaches a man whose machinery has opinions and whose weather loves improvisation. I don't know what drew 3 circles in my wheat. I know what it didn't do, and I know what it did. It did not break stems. It did not walk in. It did not leave the world the way it found it. It did tilt my compass toward up, and it did delete and restore dew. It did hold the air in a polite silence, and it did teach my kids the difference between fear and attention. We cut the field. We loaded the trucks. We told the kids not to mention circles at school because people will make it a contest and we don't need a trophy for a morning. We ate pancakes that day as promised. They tasted like wheat and work and the kind of mystery you get to keep without an invoice. If any of this fit the shape of your own dawn, say rings. I'll see it after chores. I won't check at 6:11. Check what's fixed, I tell myself, and then I go back out with the dog to see if the sky feels like listening again.